So there you go. Well, first of all, I want to welcome everybody to Team Gold's workshop, Write On, How to Write a Letter and Influence People. I want to thank Ginny White of Team Gold. She's one of our volunteers who came up with this idea and made the arrangements for Matt to lead this workshop. So thank you, Ginny. We've had a lot of interest in the workshop, so it was a really good idea. My name is Barbara Arnold. I am a member of Team Gold. And just pleased that all of you are here tonight. You're going to be hearing from our expert, Matt Rothschild. And when you are done, you should be armed with some skills and information that will make it easier for you to write an effective letter that expresses your views on the issues of today and to actually get that letter published. That's how you can make a difference in a way besides voting. Just get that letter to the editor published. Matt is the executive director of the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign and was formerly the editor and publisher of the Progressive magazine. He has written 2 books and many opinion pieces that have been published in major newspapers. Matt appears regularly on national, state, and local television, as well as radio. If you have a question for Matt, please put it in the chat. There's a chat button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we will address the questions to Matt at the end of his presentation. I'll moderate those at that point. Also, we will be sending out an email tomorrow. We'll be doing 2 things with that. One is soliciting your feedback about the program, and the other is we will be sending you Matt's top 10 tips. So if you want to take notes, that's great, but the main points here will also come in tomorrow's email. So with that, here's Matt.
Thanks so much, Barbara. Thanks, Ginny, for inviting me in the first place. Thanks for everybody from Team Gold for showing up tonight. I just want to start by saying why letters to the editor are important, because I really want to encourage you to engage in this kind of political activism. It's important because it's an easy way to try to influence public opinion, especially local public opinion. It's great when your name appears in the local paper and your neighbors or the people who see you when you're out shopping or see you at book club or see you when you're exercising or see you at worship. They'll say, well, I saw your letter to the editor. And that may be all they say. It's like when occasionally I'm on radio or TV, they'll say, I saw you on TV or I heard you on radio. But at least they're acknowledging that they saw your name, they saw what you wrote, and it's the beginning of a conversation. And I think it's really important, number one, to reassure people who agree with us, because this is a very depressing time for many of us politically. And so if they can see reassurance, someone should mute themselves if they can, because we're getting their feedback. But so I think it's important both to reassure people who agree with you, and then to enter into a civil dialogue with some people who don't agree with you. It's really important for us right now in this state and in this country that we engage in conversation with at least a fraction of the people out there who don't agree with us. Yes, there is a fraction out there that is hostile to rational argumentation, hostile to democracy for that matter. And some of those people may not be amenable to civil discourse at this point, but that's not everybody. And that's not even a majority probably of the people who may not be voting the way you like. So I think it's important for us to engage, and this is a good way to engage or start the engagement process with people who disagree with us. It's also important to write letters to the editor because public officials and their staff monitor the letters to the editor. And if they see a raft of letters to the editor on one subject, sometimes that can make a difference, certainly get their attention anyway. So that's why letters to the editor are important. Now, Barbara and Ginny sent me a couple questions that I wanted to answer, questions that they have or some of you may have sent to them. And then I'm going to go through my little cheat sheet on how to write a letter to the editor. And then we'll do a little writing exercise, just a 1-sentencer, and maybe some brave people on the Zoom will offer up their first sentence for a critique. I'm an old editor. I'm still editing every day. So I'll do an on-the-spot critique, and then we'll take questions, and then we'll be done. So that's what we're going to do. So here are some of the questions I got ahead of time. What are some good places to send a letter? The best place to send it is to your local paper, so that people who know you will see it, and that your elected officials will see it. It's also important, I think, sometimes to send letters to the biggest paper in the state, which would be the State Journal or the Journal Sentinel, just to reach as many people as possible. Another good place to send a letter to the editor is those free community newspapers, the weeklies that are prevalent, especially outside of Madison and outside of Milwaukee, but there are some free weeklies here as well. And again, it's just a way to get the word out. So another question was, do editors give preference to letters from subscribers or residents of the local community? I don't think they give preference to subscribers. They do have a strong preference for residents of the local community. And to get your letter to the editor printed, you'll have to give your name and your address and your phone number. I don't know if papers have an exclusive policy that they'll only publish letters from people in their specific community, however narrowly they draw those boundaries. But I do think they prefer to have, if you're in La Crosse, to have, and it's the La Crosse Tribune, the editor from the La Crosse Tribune would rather have someone in La Crosse than Madison. That doesn't mean you shouldn't send it to La Crosse, but you know, if I'm editing the La Crosse paper, I'm looking for people from La Crosse to fill that page. If I can't fill the page, I'll grab a letter from anybody. So yeah, you've got to know that the journalists need to fill their pages, so it's good to give them letters so to make their job easier. And so if they can't fill the pages and you sent one to La Crosse from Madison, you know, they'll fill their page that way. Should we avoid preaching to the choir in choosing newspapers? I suppose this is a question, you know, is it better to send it to the State Journal and the Cap Times, because the Cap Times has such a liberal orientation, and the State Journal is more conservative. Not as conservative as it used to be, but still conservative. You know, I think it doesn't matter. I would go for the biggest paper first in your community. I don't mind preaching to the choir. I think the choir, I've been preaching the choir my whole life. That's all I do is preach the choir. But I do think it's important to try to engage as broadly as possible. So that's why I go for the biggest papers. Do letters received from elsewhere in the state actually influence people? You know, it depends. I do think the strength of the letters to the editor is the recognition that people in your community have of the author of the letters, more so than the argument you're making in the letter. Because a lot of times, if you don't know, you know, who Joe Blow is, who signed his name or her name at the bottom of the letter, sometimes you're not going to read the letter unless you're super interested in the subject. But what grabs people's attention is, wow, you know, here's my neighbor, published in the paper. Let's see what my neighbor's got to say. And then someone asked, do letters sent not for publication impact editorial policy? Not very much, I don't think, unless you have a great relationship with the local editor and you're just sending them a letter, you know, objecting to something that they wrote. You know, maybe if they got 10 emails or 10 calls on something, if you organize and it's not just one, maybe it would tell the editor to, you know, take a second look. But I think it's better to make it for publication and try to influence people in your community and influence policymakers. So yeah, I don't recommend sending not for publication letters to the editor. But what I wanted really to do and get down to here is do this little exercise I have about how, just a short guide. I want to give you the tools so that you can write a letter to the editor in a half hour max, maybe 20 minutes, because, you know, we all have anxiety about writing. I want you to recognize that we all have anxiety about writing, even those of us who write every day, like I still try to do. Recognize that that's a fact. That's an emotional fact of life that everybody except maybe Shakespeare and John Keats had anxiety about writing, and just to name it, put it aside, recognize it, and then try to proceed with, how to overcome it, and just how to get this little writing exercise done. So the first thing is keep it short. And this is something you may have to do after you write your first draft. But letters to the editor, I've been looking around at the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel and the Cap Times and the State Journal. They're limiting them either to 200 or 250 words. And I say 100 words is best if you can get it down to 100 words. Now, it may be difficult in your first draft to get something down to 200 words or 100 words. Ben Franklin used to say, I would have written you a short letter, but I didn't have time, so I wrote you a long letter. So, I mean, get that draft done and then edit it down. But basically, it's really important to keep things short. And so I stress, you got to limit the point that you want, or points that you want to make, down to one or maximum of 2 points on one subject. You don't want to talk about more than one subject, and you don't want to make more than 1 or 2 points about that one subject. And then I'm a big fan of having a really short first sentence that just indicates to the editor and to your neighbor who's reading that letter to the editor what you're talking about. You don't want to have a long wind up, a long calisthenic before you get down to business. And so I recommend a short first sentence of 15 words or less. And just all you do in that first sentence is say what the subject matter is, Robin, Boss, and Gableman, for instance, and then what your opinion of it is, that Washington had done this or whatever. Just let people know what you're talking about and where you're coming. And this, in journalism, we emphasize using really small words and short paragraphs. Small words because we want to communicate to as many people as possible. And we don't want to show off our SAT verbal or our William Buckley vocabulary. There's I'm dating myself now, but we want to, one thing Trump did that he got criticized for was speaking like a sixth grader, but, he was clever like a fox that way. Yeah, I mean, it's important to use vocabulary that everyone can understand. I wrote something within the last 3 months, and then I was on radio that day on Devil's Advocates, and Crudy couldn't pronounce the word I had used in my first sentences, and I'm saying, God, I should follow my own advice here and use a similar word. I think I used obsequious about Voss with Trump or something, and I could have just said ass kissing or something similar to that, maybe less vulgar, but anyway, I could have conveyed it in a way that everyone would understand. And so that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to communicate in a way that, everyone can understand. And so we use really simple words. You don't need to use problematic or problematical. You can say it's bad. It's a 3-letter word that everyone understands rather than the multisyllabic word that we're told to use in college, but we don't need to use in journalism. Short paragraphs. This is mostly for the eye. It's just so much easier on the eye to read short paragraphs, especially in a physical newspaper or for that matter, online. I mean, we don't want to be reading Samuel Beckett here, who never indented a paragraph for pages. We want to be able to grab what the person is saying real easily. And so the short paragraphs helps the eye. And so by short paragraphs, I mean a paragraph that is literally no more than 2 sentences, and often just 1 sentence. Some of this is an offense to your English teacher in 7th or 8th grade or in high school or even in college, but feel free to actually use 1 sentence in a paragraph or 2 sentences in a paragraph max. A paragraph should not be more than that. And while I'm violating instructions that we all got from our English teachers, it is absolutely permissible, and this isn't on the sheet, but you can take this to the bank, absolutely permissible to start sentences with and or but. And or but are the easiest ways to connect thoughts. We do it all the time in spoken English. You will not get struck down by lightning by starting a sentence or a paragraph with and or but. So feel free to do that. If you want to feel naughty doing it, all the better. But do it. I do it all the time. Here's general writing instruction that you get no matter what you're writing. I think don't use the passive tense. Gableman had his contract renewed. Well, that's a passive tense. Who renewed Gableman's contract? It wasn't an act of God. So it would be Robin Voss renewed Gableman's contract. So there's two reasons not to use the passive tense. One is it's just bad writing. But even worse than that, it hides the bad person. It hides the person who's doing the thing that you want to draw attention to that's wrong. Ukraine was shelled. Well, Ukraine was shelled by whom? Putin shelled Ukraine. So, that's just making a passive into an active, and active verbs drive the language, as any writing coach will tell you. Acronyms, I don't like using any acronym other than CIA and FBI or UN or USA. A lot of times people have organizations or they're writing about an organization like the Wisconsin Elections Commission, and then they'll go WEC. People run away from things that they don't understand. And if I'm scanning a letter to the editor and it's got an abbreviation WEC that I've never seen before, my impulse is to scoot away. And so also, you don't want to force the reader to go back to the first reference if you're doing Wisconsin Elections Commission, parentheses, WEC, and then 2 paragraphs later, you've got WEC, and holy cow, I forgot what that meant. And then you got to go back up and read it. And it's just kind of rude to the reader. So I don't like using acronyms. I don't recommend it. And then I think we all need to recognize that whatever group we're in, we've got group jargon. We've got group jargon in the nonprofit sector. There's group jargon that lawyers have. There's group jargon that academics have. There's group jargon that leftists have. But this gets to the question of audience. Who are you trying to convince here? Who are you trying to talk to here? And so I think you should recognize when you're using jargon and try not to use it in a letter to the editor or in other communications that are for public. And so just beware there that, you're talking to, envision a neighbor who is a decent person, but not all that interested in politics. And you're trying to convince that neighbor. And that neighbor doesn't know the ins and outs of the issue and doesn't speak in shorthand like we do when we're talking to just people who already agree with us and are in groups with us. So here's some conflicting things. Definitely by the end, when you right before you send your letter in, you want to make sure that you are not yelling and screaming at the editor or the reader for that matter. So you don't want to be using, really screamy words. Certainly you don't want to be using all caps or exclamation points. So you want to use a measured tone. You can be angry, but you don't want to scream and yell. And so you want to kind of tone it down at the end. But the odd thing is, the contradictory thing is, I want you to use anger at the beginning. Why? Because a lot of us want to stall before we get to the computer and before we do our writing. This is the anxiety that I mentioned at the top. We're anxious about writing. We know we should write a letter to the editor. It's good political activism. But we just haven't done it. And we told ourselves we were going to do it this week or this month, and we haven't done one this week or this month. And so how do you get over that anxiety? The easiest way is when something really pisses you off. Harness that anger and let that anger drive you to the computer. And then you'll be able to start. For instance, if it was the, Wisconsin Supreme Court decision on gerrymandering or Voss on Gableman or whatever it was, that made you angry, made me angry anyway. And then I use that anger to drive myself to the computer, as you should use it. And then you can take your anger out at the end. But you got to use that anger. It's very helpful, especially getting over writer's block. And then here's the next crucial thing about getting over writer's block, because this is an impulse that every single writer that I've ever met has. And any person who writes who's not a professional writer has also. That is, you've used anger to drive yourself to the computer, you're attending to the task that you were trying to avoid, and you write your first sentence. And then you're so happy with yourself that you've written your first sentence. And you're so anxious about writing the next sentence that you reward yourself by getting up from the computer after that first sentence, and you go check your email, or you go online, you go get a cup of coffee, you go, do a load of laundry or something. And if you want to get this task done in a half hour, you cannot get up after every sentence you write. And so I've given clinics on writing op-eds and writing letters to the editor for 20 years now. And this is one thing that I think a lot of people kind of giggle at when I mention it, because we all do this, or we all have this temptation to do this, that, I've written the first sentence. Okay, that was the hardest part, I can tell myself. And then I will reward myself. And in this technological age, one way we reward ourselves is just by Googling around. We go online, we tell ourselves that we're looking for the quote that we needed or the fact that we needed. And maybe that's true, and maybe it's kidding ourselves. But even if it's true, 9 times out of 10, you go up and you find that fact, but you then wander around a little bit more. And one Google search leads to another, and then you're distracted by another thing online. And lo and behold, you've just wasted 20 minutes to find something that really just took 1 minute. And so again, it's just very inefficient, and it's going to make this task just too hard and too time consuming. So whatever you do, when you're writing your first draft of your letter to the editor, don't get up after the first sentence. Stay where you are until you're all the way done. And by all means, please do not Google while you're writing your first draft. You can go check that fact by Googling that fact after you've done with your first draft. But Google is short for procrastination, and recognize that that's the case most of the time. So then when you're done with the draft, first of all, you got to see how long it is. And chances are it's going to be longer than 200 words. And then you've got to trim it down. And you can trim it down by seeing if there are places where you've repeated yourself. One way to find repetitions and other errors, grammatical errors, is by reading your letter to the editor out loud. And this is, even if its first draft is 300 words or 400 words, it will only take you 2.5 minutes to read it out loud. And there's a weird thing about the brain. The brain, the eyes don't catch everything. The ears can catch things that the eyes can't. I do radio scripts, 2 radio scripts a week for WMUU, Radio That Moves You, here in Madison, Wisconsin on 102.9. And I will write the script, and then I will rehearse the script several times. And when I'm rehearsing the script, I will see, holy cow, I use that exact expression or that exact phrase, if it's not that common a phrase, in 2 paragraphs in a row. I got to change that. Or oops, I forgot a word here. And then when you're reading it out loud, you realize you forgot the word. But when you're writing so fast and it was a simple word and easy to skip, you don't realize that you omitted a word. So definitely read it out loud before you send it in. And also in the process of reading it out loud, you can hear the screaming and yelling words that you are using if they're just too angry, and find a little gentler way to say the same thing that way. That takes the anger out that I talked about before. So finally, you want to get these letters to the editor emailed in really quickly. Now, because newspapers, they have like 20 news stories every day. And there are people who are writing letters to the editor about many of those news stories. And so if you wait 3 days to talk about Voss and Gableman, well, there'll be 60 stories that have come down into that newspaper since then. And other people will be writing letters to the editor about something that happened more recently, and the editor's chances are going to take the thing that happened most recently. So try, again, using anger, get to that computer and email that letter within 24 hours of the news event that happened that you're angry about, or the news story that appeared in the paper that you're writing to, or if there was an editorial, for instance, in the paper that ticked you off, you should write the next day to that editor. And if you're writing about an article or a editorial that ran in the paper that you're objecting to, or praising for that matter, make sure you give the title of the article and the date it appeared in parentheses. When you say, I saw your article, or I saw your editorial on gerrymandering and you really missed the boat. And then parentheses, April 5th, and whatever the title of the article was. So, because a lot of editors want that. But, and again, you'll need your name and your address and your phone number, but send it in. And now I think we've added the contact info for the Journal Sentinel and the Cap Times and the State Journal. But you can look up, it's real easy to find if you're not in those areas, what your local paper's policy is. Go to their website, or just type in, and this is what I did for these three, just type in the name of your paper and letters to the editor policy, and you will get their policy, and chances are you'll get the email address. And for each of these three papers anyway, you will get an email form to fill out and to cut and paste your letter into too, after you give them your name and your telephone number and your address, and then you just send it electronically that way by cut and paste. And so, you know, I just looked up, for instance, the Racine Journal-Times 5 minutes before talking with you today, in case you wanted to send something about Voss, for instance. I'll try to cut and paste that into the chat maybe, but it's really easy for you to find if you're not using these three papers. And I know there's some people on this Zoom, not even from Wisconsin, so feel free to just Google the name of the paper and letters to the editor policy, and that's how you get it in the door. But those are my tips. Now, when I give these trainings, usually I want to do an assignment right now on the spot, a quick writing assignment. So what I want you to do is to take 5 minutes max. It's 7:30 now, and I want you just to write a first sentence that's 15 words or fewer about the first sentence of a letter to the editor you want to write. And then I will ask for some people to read out loud what you came up with if you want. So do that, and then I will do a quick critique, and then I'll answer questions, and then we'll call it a night. All right. So who wants to volunteer and read their first sentence?
I will.
Excellent.
I am brokenhearted about the recent Supreme Court decision to uphold the GOP version of Wisconsin voting maps.
So that's perfect. So that's very short. It's under 15 words, so I didn't count them. And you had the Wisconsin Supreme Court decision on gerrymandering is the subject, and you're brokenhearted. That's your attitude toward the subject. That's perfect. That's all you need to do. And then you'd explain in, you know, the next 3 or 4 sentences, you know, why it's bad. But you've set it up for that, and that's exactly what you want to do. Arden, do you want to go?
Sure, thank you. My sentence is, Tom Nelson is the best Democratic candidate to beat Senator Ron Johnson in the fall midterm elections.
Yeah, that's fine. You could even probably cut in the fall midterm elections out and make it even shorter. It's interesting. I just found that the Racine Journal-Times link that I put in the chat there, that they charge you now. This is a weird policy. They charge you now if you are endorsing candidates in your letter to the editor, like $20. I've never heard of such a thing. I don't know. I think it's kind of outrageous, actually. But anyway, that's an aside. This was fine. You set out exactly what you wanted to say. You're for Tom Nelson against Ron Johnson, and then you'd explain. So that's what we want. Just an easy setup, letting people know exactly where you're coming from.
So this is Tim from Mount Horeb.
Hi, Tim.
Hey, those who favor term limits for legislators should work on behalf of the fair maps. And then I was going to follow with, that's enough for first sentence.
Yeah, it's a little complicated, I think, because I'm not sure you're going to have enough space to explain both term limits and fair, why we need fair maps. But it's ambitious, and I admire it for that. I think going straight ahead with, we need fair maps, and the Wisconsin Supreme Court has betrayed us might be an easier thing to do. But if you can get all that done in 200 words, more power to you, Tim. So, again, you had actually two subjects there, and your attitude toward it, which was clear, and that's what we want. We want real clarity, both about subject and attitude, and you had that. So I commend you for that.
I'll try one.
All righty.
I'm Jackie Schultz over in Wanakee. So
Hi,
hi.
Jackie.
Actually, I'm going to do two.
Excellent.
Why aren't you involved in politics? And then I switched it also, will democracy disappear if you don't vote?
So both of these raise the question as to whether rhetorical questions are good. Now, used to be that almost every editor you would ask would say, and every editor you'd ask would say, I hate rhetorical questions. I'm more permissive than that, especially the older I get, and that, it's okay to use rhetorical questions. I'm not sure it's great to use rhetorical questions at the beginning. The first, why aren't you involved in politics? It's unclear where you're going to go with that. And what we want people to know in the first sentence is pretty much where you're going. And I guess I would just, like the second one, I might rewrite and just say it's imperative for democracy for people to turn out and vote, rather than raising the rhetorical question, will democracy, maybe it's not so rhetorical these days, will democracy disappear if people don't vote? So I guess my advice would be avoid the rhetorical question in the first sentence. In part because I don't want you to hurt your chances with the editor who may have been raised the way I was in journalism, which is we don't like rhetorical questions, but also just because it gives a little more clarity.
I have one.
Excellent.
My name is Tamara.
Hi, Tamara.
I am appalled that my tax dollars are paying for Gableman's election investigations.
I think that's great. You would need to use Gableman's first name probably at first introduction, but it's great. You've got Michael Gableman as the subject. You're being appalled as the emotion, the attitude toward it. That's all you need. One thing that we're doing in the messaging business about Gableman is never referring to it as an investigation, because we try to use words other than investigation, like fishing expedition, circus, something like that. We don't want to validate it by calling it an investigation.
Yeah, I was searching for the word for it. I wanted to say witch hunt, but I thought I better not.
Fishing expedition, I think, is good.
Yeah.
And it's a real kind of down to earth, folksy expression, and it's. But anyway, as far as the technique on getting your subject matter and your attitude out, I thought that was excellent, Tamara.
Thank you.
I have two that first one, gerrymandering is an attack on our democracy. And second, submission of false election results must be prevented to save our democracy.
So the second one, I like the first one. Gerrymandering is an attack on our democracy. Submission of false election results should be what? Read me that again.
Sorry. Submission of false election results must be prevented to save our democracy.
Yeah, I like it, except it's passive. The must be prevented. It must be prevented is kind of a passive. Who's going to prevent it? So, but the attitude is there and the subject is there, so that's good. The other thing I liked is you use the word must. I think when we're writing letters to the editor or op-eds, you should look for the must, get to the must, or get to the should, or get to the should not, or get to the must not. Those are good words to use in your first sentence: must or must not, should or should not. Very good, important words to express attitude.
So would starting with "we must prevent" submission be a better?
Yeah, I would say we must prevent the decertification of voters in elections. And that could be the first sentence, and just say this absurd idea, or some Republicans like Michael Gableman are suggesting or proposing this absurd idea, and we must oppose it for the following reasons.
Okay.
So there you get in the second sentence the person who's doing it, and leading into your 2 points as to why it's bad.
Sue Jones has had her hand up.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. So another day, another mass shooting. We must pass common sense gun requirements.
I like it. I like the second half of it better, but because you got to the must there and it's real clear. Another day, another mass shooting. It's just, I just wonder whether that tone is going to reach people you want to reach or not. I'm kind of ambivalent on it. I like it on the one gut level, and I like communicating that way. But on the other hand, I think maybe it's too sarcastic. Just a question. Also, one other thing, some editors want full sentences. I'm not that way anymore, but another day, another mass shooting is technically not a full sentence, even though I would say it's okay. I mean, it's how we talk, right? And I think the people who are really sticklers to the old way of writing in perfect English are going to have to give way. And that's a democratizing force, the way people speak the English language here in the United States. So that's a good thing. It's not dumbing it down. You know, I know a lot of people say, Matt, you say small words, short paragraphs, you're dumbing it down. I don't think it's dumbing it down. I think it's smarting up to the way you can communicate most effectively to most people. I mean, you know, I write poetry on the side, or I'm going to write more poetry on the side where I can be more oblique and obscure and fancy, but not in letters to the editor or in op-eds. It's not the place for it. Anyone else? And then I just wanted to ask if there are questions about writing, questions about submitting. I do want to say that part of writing and getting in the practice of writing letters to the editor is doing good media activism. And good media activism means helping reporters and editors doing their job. We can't view them unless they're super right wing, do not view them as the enemy. You know, they're trying to do their job. They're super busy. They're overworked. They have a page to fill, or, you know, they need to get a quote from you if you're in an organization that, you know, has an expertise in the field and they're calling you up. they ask you for a quote, give them a quote. Or, say, I'll give you a quote in 10 minutes, I'll call you right back, but make sure you call them right back. And do try to establish a relationship with the editor or with the journalist on the beat. Just, over time, everything's relationship building in this world. And if you can establish a relationship on Facebook or on Twitter or sending an email, reporters are human. They like to be thanked if they write a good article or if the editor writes a good article. And Scott Milford of the State Journal has written a lot of good editorials on gerrymandering, for instance. So, if we want to ban gerrymandering, and you want to have a relationship with the op-ed editor at the State Journal, when you, send a letter in or send them an email anyway saying, loved your editorial on this, or send an email. You don't need to use letters to the editor to scold all the time. Sometimes you can use letters to the editor to praise. There are 2 questions. Laura asked, can you submit the same letter to more than one paper? I don't recommend that. I would send one letter to one paper, and you can write on the same subject, but write it differently and send it to another paper. Don't send the identical letter to more than one paper. Online media like Tone in Madison, etc. Arden writes, if the online papers have letters to the editor spaces, I would certainly send there. I was going to look up Wisconsin Examiner for that today, and I forgot to do that, I'm embarrassed to say. But see if there are opportunities in those online papers to get your voice across and avail yourself of that if it's available. Mary asks, is it better to say it's clear to us that the voice of the majority doesn't matter in Wisconsin, or can I say it's been clear to us that the voice of the majority doesn't matter in Wisconsin?
The difference is it clear, or it is clear, or it has been clear?
I think you can say, and the question is to me, it's more, you can do either, but the question is, who is the to us? So if I was writing this, I would just say, I would cut the whole beginning and just go, the voice of the majority doesn't matter in Wisconsin, and it's supposed to matter in a democracy, or something like that. And then you can just demonstrate it by saying, 83% want medical marijuana, 67% or whatever it is want legalized recreational marijuana, or whatever the issue is, expansion of Medicaid, 70%, whatever. So just prove your point that way. But yeah, I just think you can just go straight to the point. The voice of the majority, or you could do it this way. Our public officials should stop ignoring the majority views of Wisconsinites, and then, approach it that way. But to have to us without specifying to the reader or to the editor who the us is that you're talking about, I wouldn't do that. Ginny writes, is this sentence too snarky? Republican voters are as ignorant about real world events as Russians living under Putin's rule. Well, it's not so much that it's too snarky, but my question is, what are you trying to achieve here? Because I still, and call me naive if you want, I still want to convince some folks who don't vote the way I'd like them to vote that they can come around. And so this, you're just going to be turning all Republican voters around, and or turning them off, that is. And so is that what you want to do by that? So I would say some, if you're going to go this way, some Republican voters, so that the more enlightened Republican voter can say to himself or herself, not me. Yeah, I just think I try not to make categorical statements like that. But another way to go at it is for some right-wingers in the United States, who only get their news from Fox or right-wing talk radio are similar to Russians living under Putin's rule, or something like that.
Yeah, I was going to follow it up with the idea that Putin has eliminated independent media. But these people are willfully ignorant that they only will look at one source.
No, and I think it's a very important point that you're making, Jeannie. I try to make it in talks that I'm giving around the state right now. You know, there is a big chunk of our population that is on a 24/7 IV drip of Fox News and right-wing talk radio. And that's all they get. That's all they consume. That's their media diet. And when you're fed such a rancid media diet, you end up with some rancid ideas. And so that's a real problem. So yeah, I commend you for making that point. Are there any other questions or comments? And, you know, Ginny's going to hand out by email the sheet I have. Just make whatever use of it you want. Share it with your friends. This isn't proprietary at all. I'm just trying to pass on, you know, the little knowledge that I've accumulated in this media activism world to as many people as I can, in hopes that it'll help people get the tools that you need to empower you to be able to write a letter to the editor in sufficient time, that it doesn't take all day, and that you can engage in this kind of media activism frequently. And the more people who do it, the better. I mean, we need to communicate with our fellow citizens. We need to notify our elected officials about how strongly we feel on these urgent issues. Meg Gordon says that that CNN junkies are also no bubble. Now, this is absolutely true. I mean, I used to live 1 block from West High School in Madison, and I was working at the Progressive, and I could go a week without bumping into anybody who didn't agree with me politically. When I would go to the Regent Food Market, the co-op there, to buy my groceries, everyone agreed with me. Everyone at the office agreed with me. And everyone I interacted with on the phone and by email agreed with me. And, you know, you could watch Democracy Now! In the morning and read The Nation when you got home at night, and watch MSNBC, and, you know, you don't encounter a different view. That is just unhealthy. It's just unhealthy for our democracy to be in 2 separate media universes. It also makes you intellectually flabby, because you don't have to encounter and reckon with an idea that is contradictory to one of your own. And ultimately, it's just bad politics, because you're not trying to persuade someone to come around to your way of viewing things. So I appreciated Meg's point there.
Well, I want to thank Matt. I think this has been great. I know I have learned a lot. I hope everyone else has as well. I thought there were a couple of your tips, Matt, that really resonated with me personally. One is using anger to get over writer's block. I think anger can be a great motivator to get you to put your words down on paper. And Google is short for procrastination. I think that's something that's really true, certainly for me. It's really easy to go down that rabbit hole, and that can be a problem. So in addition to Matt's top 10 tips, which we will send out to everybody in an email, which should go out tomorrow from Team Gold, we'll include links to the newspapers that are in the listed in the chat, and we will also have a link to a very short survey. We would love your feedback about tonight's program, and so please do respond to it. It's very short. Team Gold has been the sponsor of this. We are a Madison Westside neighborhood team. We support progressive causes and progressive candidates, which typically means Democratic candidates, although we have also certainly worked hard to elect people like Jill Karofsky to the state Supreme Court, and Jill Underly as the superintendent of schools most recently. So also progressive candidates that aren't necessarily affiliated with any particular party. If you'd like to know more about Team Gold or how you can volunteer with us, you could indicate your interest on the short survey, or you can just send us an email in response to the one that goes out tomorrow. This year is another critical election year. I think it's easy to say, well, we managed to get through 2020 and our work is done. Not at all. And I think most of us or all of us who are here from Wisconsin know that this year is very, very critical. We need to reelect the governor, Governor Evers, and we need to reelect the Attorney General, Josh Call, as well as defeat Ron Johnson. So any and all volunteer help is certainly welcome. We need to get this done, just like we were able to be successful in 2020. So I hope to see letters from all of you in local newspapers soon. And again, thank you for joining us. Thank you, Matt, for volunteering of your time and your expertise. Great feedback. I love the write a sentence and critique. It was a great way for us to figure out the little nuances that maybe didn't quite fit into the top 10 tips. And so with that, have a good evening. And like I said, look for that email and give us the feedback. So.